Chapter 1. Rejecting the common concept of God and life as my God. Part 1 out of 5. God being a wise old man in the sky who watches over us and who has a divine and unknown plan for us all. My first concept of who or what God was fairly standard and probably similar to most people's first concept of God, namely that God is a wise old man who created everything, including us humans, in 6 days, who lives in a place called heaven alongside his angels, somewhere up there in the sky, and who has created paradise and eternal life for all those who have followed his moral teachings, and who has created hell for those who have not, and who also has a divine plan for all of us, but whose plan we unfortunately cannot understand, for only he is all-knowing, and we humans are not. But with this concept then also claiming that if we simply do our best to follow his teachings, trust and believe in him, and then pray hard enough, that we then might receive his blessing and get closer to knowing his plan for us during our life and after our death, and all of which can then give us direction, purpose and meaning in our life. And when I was a child, I found this first concept of God to be very comforting, knowing that we can live forever in paradise after we die, and that the people who have wronged us will burn in hell for their sins, and that there's someone out there watching over the good people like me and blessing those who are faithful to him and his teachings. And so when I first heard this concept of God, I of course wanted to believe that such a God really existed. Part 2 out of 5. Me rejecting this God after lack of evidence and adversities happening to me and other innocent people, leading to me then searching for new guidance. But as I got older, I couldn't find any evidence whatsoever for any of these claims. At least not the kind of evidence that we could use in order to solve everyday problems and similar mysteries, like how in a murder mystery case, the blood on a kitchen knife could be used as evidence to solve the mystery and to make a legal case against someone. Because if God and heaven were indeed somewhere up there in the sky, we should have found at least some traces of evidence for them, especially once we explored it with planes and rockets. Furthermore, regarding God watching over us, I noticed that most of us have experienced at least some kind of adversity in their life that left us wondering why God did this to us and why he did not do anything to help or save us. For example, when a loved one got seriously sick, injured or even died from things like disease, a car or plane accidents, or from war or a mass shooting. And that when this adversity happened to us, we found that no matter how hard we prayed, God did not do anything to save our loved ones or to punish the people who wronged us. Which might then lead to a crisis of faith, unless we could convince ourselves that all of these terrible things must be part of God's plan for us, and that we simply need to keep trusting in him and keep on praying that God will eventually solve these problems for us. With me personally, I eventually also started to experience adversities, such as my mother's deep and recurring depressions, and my own insecurities and hatred for myself because of how I looked and because I could never excel at anything I wanted, along with my mediocrity and having no special talents, which meant that I never stood out and also had to work much harder than others. And when I then thought about all of these bad things happening to people, including to a person like me who had never done anything wrong, along with the fact that these bad things did not happen to people who had done some very bad things, I got convinced that God could not exist, at least not in this traditional concept, because no God would allow such injustice and would allow all of this adversity to happen to so many innocent people, including someone as innocent as me. And so when I had rejected this concept of God, and I still wanted to find ways to make my life meaningful for when I would eventually die, I decided to look for other sources of inspiration through which I could find purpose and meaning. Part 3 out of 5. Life as my guide towards meaning by constantly wanting to improve and help others to do the same, so that a part of me lives on after my death. And when I asked myself the question of how I could find meaning and purpose in my life before I would die, I obviously didn't have any clear answer right away, nor did I have any direction on how to find it. And eventually, I reasoned that if I wanted to figure out how to give meaning to my life by dealing with death, I probably needed to analyze the best expert on this subject, which I figured was life itself, since it had over 3.5 billion years of experience in dealing with death. And so I eventually decided to look at life itself in order to see if I could find any patterns that might help me to figure out its purpose, how it's been able to deal with its own mortality, and how it might therefore be able to give meaning to itself. And I then first of all looked at the evolution of life from a simple single-celled organism into us human beings. And I reasoned that in order for life to have been able to evolve into the most complex and potentially most creative life form that had ever been, it must have had the goal of constantly evolving and improving through reproduction and instincts, which I have called passive evolution, which I then figured might also be how life could give purpose and meaning to itself. And I then reasoned that when life forms were able to pass on their genes and their instinctively newly learned skills, a part of them would then still live on in their offspring, even after they died. And that when that offspring could then pass on its DNA and new skills to the next generation, and that generation passes on theirs and so forth, then all of the life that had died can still live on as part of those new life forms, and in that sense can then live on forever. And so I reasoned that therefore, the solution to the question of how life could give purpose and meaning to itself was its contribution to this ongoing process of evolution and improvement. Part 4 out of 5. Me adopting a mindset for constant improvement/evolution and to then help others, and calling it the God of all life, or goal mindset. And I then figured that I could do this form of improving and living on as a part of new life, not just through reproduction and instincts, but also by consciously improving myself and teaching skills to others. I could, for example, improve at being a tennis player by mastering tactics used by Rafael Nadal and by improving my health and fitness, and then help others to learn from my experiences and to then pass on this information to them. In the same way I could pass on knowledge in stored DNA through reproduction. And all in order to ensure that when my death would come, either timely or untimely, a part of me, namely the knowledge and teachings I had given, could then still live on in other life forms. And that this part of me could then continue to help others to improve themselves. And therefore, I figured that there might be something to this idea of trying to emulate life by constantly aiming to improve, and not only through reproduction and instinctively, but also and primarily consciously, through always wanting to do everything better, and to then help and teach others to do the same. And so, I adopted this mindset to mimic life by always simply doing my best to improve at everything I did, and to then help others to do the same by sharing my own experiences, in order to give the most meaning to my life. And by doing so, I replaced the traditional concept of God with a concept which I called the God of all life, or goal for short, in order to create a so-called goal mindset, which I thought was a fitting name, since I was convinced that constantly aiming to improve, no matter how terrible the situation is, and to then help others, should also be the main goal of everyone's life. Part 5 out of 5. Me turning so-called adversity into growth, just like life, and feeling confident that, instead of prayers, I could trust my own creativity to create something better. And after I had adopted this goal mindset for several years, I then had to face more and more adversity, like my dad's terminal cancer diagnosis, my mom's recurring depression, and me continuing to be mediocre and to never excel at anything I wanted. And I then found that I was eventually able to turn all of these seemingly terrible situations into opportunities to learn and grow into a stronger, wiser, and better version of myself. Regarding my dad's cancer and potential early death, for example, I was able to become more motivated to learn his skills in order to be able to replace him as head of the family, and to also find out why this cancer happened to him and how I could become healthy enough to prevent it from also happening to me. And then regarding my mom's depression, I was able to recognize myself in her own insecurities and disempowering beliefs about herself. And so I decided to seek mental help from friends, professionals, and people online like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan in order to get to the bottom of my own insecurities and become better prepared to face my own demons. And finally, regarding my own mediocrity, I was able to use my ability to work hard in order to get to the bottom of what skills actually were and what I personally needed to learn and create as many new skills as possible, which then greatly helped me to create the 3 elements I needed in order to become skilled. And I also got even more motivated when I realized that life itself was also instinctively learning to adapt and improve to their ever-changing environment, no matter if their habitat was destroyed by a volcanic eruption, by human activity, or any other forms of adversity. Life would always simply keep going and do its best to move on and to learn and adapt to any environment. And this aspect of life greatly inspired me to do the same in my own adversities. And so, after I found that I was eventually able to turn seemingly terrible situations into opportunities to learn and grow into a better version of myself, and to then also help others to learn and grow, I got more and more happy each time I saw my own or someone else's improvement and growth. And I also got much more peace of mind, knowing that I could increase my life's meaning every time I improved at something and was able to help others to do the same. And I got even happier when I then also realized that instead of being subjected to some supposed divine plan, I could instead create my own happiness, follow my own path, and make my own fate. All by creating a mindset that I myself can turn any seemingly terrible situation into an opportunity to learn and grow into a better, stronger, and wiser person. Chapter 2. God as creative energy that wants to maximize its potential. Part 1 out of 4. Toltec wisdom, saying we are part of the universe's creative energy and are therefore able to create everything, both good and bad, both heaven and hell. And so after having had this goal mindset for several years, especially regarding my improvement in law studies, hobbies, work, health, and especially in philosophy, I had created the foundations for the knowledge that I wanted to eventually share in these videos. And then I started to think more and more about how my own creativity enabled me to learn and grow so much over the years, which could then in turn make me feel the happiest. And that therefore, in order for myself to become the happiest, I needed to maximize my creativity. And I also sometimes thought that some of these creative insights that I had gotten over the years, especially regarding the meaning of life, were simply magical and maybe even godlike, and that maximizing my creativity could therefore be central to the meaning of life and happiness. And then I came across ancient Toltec wisdom that said that there is divine creative energy of the universe that we humans are all part of. And this greatly resonated with me, as this could explain why I had gotten the happiest whenever I was able to improve by being able to do better next time, and so that I was then able to create something better. Furthermore, Toltec wisdom also spoke about creating heaven and hell right here on earth. Like how, when we tell each other to go to hell, we are both actually already in hell, namely a hell that we had just created by arguing with each other. But also how, when we instead respect and want to learn from each other, we can then forgive each other and focus on now creating a better future and on creating an actual heaven right here on earth. And this also resonated greatly with me, as I felt even more empowered to shape my own future and to create my own happiness and my own heavenly kingdom right here on earth. Part 2 out of 4. Jesuit scholars quote, "Not maximizing your potential is the only real sin, and me helping others so they can help me to further maximize my potential." And when I was watching a video about the mindset of how we create everything that shows up in our life, both good and bad, I heard a quote from a Jesuit scholar which said, "The only real sin is not maximizing your God-given potential. God gave you all these gifts, and not respecting this by maximizing them is the only real sin." And this phrase, maximizing your potential, felt like an incredible eye-opener to me, because now I could better understand why improving myself and helping others to do the same could make me the happiest, as I could then not only further maximize my own potential, but also help other people to maximize their own potential, and who can then in turn help me to further maximize my own potential again. And then I also found out about the law of reciprocity, which was a scientifically proven concept that said that when we give something to people and help them, they instinctively want to do something for us as well, which then further indicated to me that we are instinctively guided towards helping each other to maximize our combined creativity in order to then further maximize our own potential and our combined potential. And so slowly but surely, I started to look more and more at the power of the creative mind. And I then reminded myself of how I was able to turn my seemingly terrible situations into opportunities to learn, grow, and further maximize my potential, all by using my creativity. And I then realized that instead of thoughts and prayers, all I needed to do was to simply maximize my creativity in order to be able to turn all situations into opportunities to learn and grow, and to further maximize my own potential, and to then help others to do the same. Part 3 out of 4. After completing my 21-day water-only fast, asking myself the question, are our body's messages connected to maximizing our potential? And with this mindset to want to do everything to maximize my potential, I then ultimately decided to do a water-only fast, with the goal to cleanse and heal my body into a state where it could function optimally. And one of the main reasons why I decided to do this was because the body was the end product of billions of years of evolution, innovation, and improvement through trial and error, and was therefore an absolute masterpiece of creative engineering, all of which greatly indicated to me that regarding how it would function optimally, I simply needed to interpret all of its messages correctly and listen to them, especially regarding messages such as resting completely when feeling symptoms of fatigue and tiredness, drinking water when thirsty, and especially not eating when I was not hungry. And when I had completed this process, my mental clarity increased to levels I could have never imagined, as I was able to learn and adapt much more quickly, and also feel much more confident about the ideas I had on the God of all life and all the other philosophies, not to mention the physical benefits and how much better my body functioned overall. And along with having heard all of the amazing healing stories of people who had done similar fasts, I wanted to know more about my own body and how it could help me in not only healing me, but also how it could help me in further maximizing my potential. Part 4 out of 4. Our body as God's temple of creative energy, and then studying religion with God as the divine creative energy that wants us to maximize our potential. And after I wanted to know more about my body and its messages regarding the maximization of my potential, I thought about how fasting in religion was said to enhance one's connection to God, and how my own fasting had unlocked much more of my creative potential, which then indicated to me that religion might be a good next step to understand my body. And I then also remembered a Bible phrase that said that our body is God's temple, and that when we treat it as such, that we can become closer to God. And I then reasoned that if God were indeed connected to divine creative energy and the maximization of my potential, and that if listening to my body, especially through fasting, could allow me to unlock more of my creative potential, then this phrase could explain why I felt so much more creativity and happiness because of the fast. And after I had realized this, I figured that religion might contain some more nuggets of truth regarding the human body and the maximization of my potential. And so I decided to then analyze the Bible through the lens of the God of all life, with God being connected to divine creative energy, with this creative energy being inside of our own body and all other life forms, and with the most important goal in my human life being the maximization of my own potential, humanity's potential, and all of life's combined potential. Chapter 3. The body, religion, and maximizing our combined creative potential. Part 1 out of 8. God as the universe's divine creative energy that caused the Big Bang and then created everything, including us, over billions of years of improvement. And so I started with the Bible and the Old Testament, and first came across the story of creation again, which said that God created everything out of nothing, and that He also created us human beings out of dust, which we would eventually return to, according to Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. Now I then looked at what science said about the origin of everything, and according to the Smithsonian Institute, the universe and everything in it did indeed start from dust, namely stardust, which was all created out of nothing after the occurrence of the Big Bang. But I also found that science, even with all our modern scientific instruments, still could not explain why everything in the universe began, including the question of how or why life in particular began, and how exactly it could have possibly evolved from a single-celled organism into all the complex organisms we have today, including our own incredibly complex human body, which gives us the ability to think, reason, and create the most incredible things. And when I myself tried to answer this question of why everything started and why we evolved into what we are now, I thought about God as creative energy again, and I came up with the following theory. The universe and everything in it began and had evolved into us as the most complex life form because there is some divine creative energy in this universe, which is always looking for new ways to maximize its creative potential, and which was somehow able to create something out of nothing, and to then also somehow improve and evolve itself in order to create us as the life forms with the most creative potential ourselves. And because this creative energy, along with its creative processes to maximize its potential, is nearly incomprehensible, this energy that was somehow able to create everything can simply be called God. And when I then looked in this way at the instinctive behaviors of life forms, like surviving, reproducing, and adapting to the environment by trying out new things, learning and improving, I could now explain all of this by saying that there is divine creative energy inside of them, which is instinctively leading them towards the maximization of their potential. And after I created this explanation, I felt incredibly happy and excited to see if the Bible contained more nuggets of truth that could help me to further my understanding of God and the maximization of my potential. Part 2 out of 8. God creating us in its image, namely to also become great creators, just like God itself. And then I came across the phrase that God created us in His image and that He entrusted His world to us. And this immediately made sense to me when I thought about how we, as human beings, can also be great creators because of our ability to think, reason, and to come up with our own creative insights to further maximize our potential. But because women also have this creative ability, I then also figured that God simply therefore could not be some sort of wise old male figure, and that instead God would be a genderless form of energy that wants to maximize its creative potential, and which would therefore be inside both men and women. And since God created everything, I also reasoned that all things are made out of this creative energy, including living beings, and that this could explain why the Bible claimed we are all God's children, as we are all part of God's creative energy. And regarding the idea of God entrusting us humans with the world, this then also made complete sense to me, because this genderless creative energy has given all of us men and women the power to consciously divert away from our instincts to maximize our potential. For example, by hating each other, working against each other, and oppressing each other. And that we are therefore also entrusted with the responsibility to instead use our God-given creative power in order to help God to further maximize its creative potential by helping to further maximize all of life's creative potential. For example, by always simply doing our best to use our creative power to learn and grow into a better version of ourselves, and to then help others, including animals, to do the same. All with the idea that we are all God's children, created with the purpose to further maximize God's potential inside all living things and all human beings, and to therefore maximize the combined potential of ourselves and that of all of our godly brothers and sisters, and to therefore maximize the combined potential of our godly family. Part 3 out of 8. The 7 deadly sins are sins because of the potentially detrimental impact on our own potential and especially on our combined potential. And after this, I looked at the section about sins, and once again, from the perspective of wanting to maximize my own and all of our combined potential, I could now better explain why the Bible claimed that lust, greed, and gluttony were sins. Regarding lust, for example, I reasoned that we do need sexual desires and pleasure in order to procreate and to create new life that we can then help to further maximize our combined potential, but also that when we instead focus on sexual desire and the short-term sexual pleasure without doing it with the goal to further maximize our potential, then we are committing a sin. And then regarding being greedy, I explained this sin by saying that when we instead share money and resources that would allow others to further maximize their potential, for example through getting their basic needs met like housing and food, like in the form of a universal basic income, then we can massively help them to maximize their potential, and so that they in turn can then help us to further maximize our combined potential. And finally, regarding gluttony, I explained this by saying that when we eat too much, The body can make us feel bloated, dizzy, or even seriously sick over enough time, as warning signs that continuing this might seriously harm our health and functioning, and which could therefore obviously greatly hinder the maximization of our potential, and which would then mean that when we die, no part of us will live on and can continue to have a positive impact on our combined potential, which would then also make this sin deadly, just like all the other sins of sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. Part 4 out of 8. Our body's physical messages helping to guide us towards the maximization of our potential. And as I was thinking about all of these sins, especially gluttony, I thought about the fact that my body would give me all kinds of symptoms whenever I had been gluttonous for enough time. And I then reasoned that this message from my body was that I should not do that again if my goal is to maximize my potential and therefore all of life's combined potential. And that the same message was given when I, for example, put my hand over a fire, overworked my muscles, or did any other action that caused a painful physical sensation. I simply reasoned that this was a warning sign from my body that in order to maximize my potential, I needed to not do this again, and simply trust and listen to all of its messages. And I then also reasoned that whenever I did not feel any of these physical sensations after trying something new, that I could then relax and did not have to take any action to change the current physical situation. Like when exposing myself to viruses, EMF radiation, vaccines, or any other potential health hazard, I realized I simply had to listen to my body in order to maximize my own and therefore all of our combined potential. Part 5 out of 8. Our body's emotional messages also helping to guide us towards further maximization of our combined potential. And then I wondered if this idea about physical messages being there to help us to maximize our potential was true about emotions as well, like sadness, anger, fear, and guilt. And I then remembered the adversity again that I had faced, especially regarding my dad's cancer diagnosis, and feeling incredibly sad and angry at life for doing these terrible things to me, but me then also eventually, partially because of these intense emotions, deciding to now do everything in my power to make sure this cancer would not happen to me or anyone else again, and to therefore look for and create the best health perspectives, and in order to help create a world where we don't have to suffer from cancer anymore. And when I looked back on this, I reasoned that these emotions might also be signs from the body that I now needed to use my God-given creativity to take action and to create a better situation in order to further maximize my own and our combined potential by dealing with the loss of a loved one. Which also reminded me of how Tarzan was able to deal with Kerchak's death by eventually deciding to replace him as the leader of the family. And then regarding emotions like fear and guilt, I reasoned that my fear of driving, for example, especially for the gradient test, also served a similar function, namely that I simply needed to change my current strategy and then keep practicing, because this then greatly helped me to get over this fear and finally get my driver's license, and which was therefore also simply a sign designed to help me to further maximize my potential. And finally, regarding guilt, and especially the enormous guilt I felt towards my body when I realized how much I had been abusing it, I realized that this emotion also had helped me tremendously in wanting to make up for these mistakes by deciding to do a 21-day water-only fast, despite the fact that this wasn't supported by my friends and family, except for my dad. I simply felt too much guilt towards my body to not do my best to make up for my mistakes. And after realizing all of this, I reasoned that every single from the body, including emotions, are there to tell us that we need to take action in order to further maximize our potential and to use our God-given creativity to use this as an opportunity to create something better, which I then also interpreted as God's way of testing me for the harder the problems that I faced, the more opportunity for growth I would get, and the closer I would come towards becoming a great creator as well. Part 6 out of 8. Our body's messages being God's way to communicate to us if what we are doing is helping or hurting us in the maximization of our combined potential. And when I had realized all of this, I revisited the idea of the body being God's temple. And since a temple is a place meant for people to be able to talk to God, and where God can talk back to them, I reasoned that talking to God might be nothing more than simply listening to our body's physical and emotional messages. For example, regarding physical messages, let's say we worry about things like viruses, 5G, vaccines, and other potentially harmful things we might encounter, we can then simply ask our body, so to speak, if what we are doing is hurting the maximization of our potential. And if it then doesn't give us any symptoms like sickness, then we can interpret this as receiving its blessing to continue doing what we are doing. And regarding emotional messages like sadness, we can then try something new, like sharing our knowledge with people for free, and then see if the body makes us feel happy again. And then I also again thought about the fact that the body was the end product of at least 3.5 billion years of creative engineering by God, and that therefore I should trust in it whenever I had any doubts about what I should do. Which then reminded me of this verse in Psalm chapter 56, verse 3 and 4. When I am afraid, I will trust in you, in God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. A verse which I could now explain by saying that God is the creative energy in the form of my body, and that I should trust it and all of its messages. Part 7 out of 8. Figuring out what to do next by relaxing, like in the corpse pose, and then channeling all of our divine creative energy, being an actual prayer. And I then also looked back at my time water fasting and lying completely relaxed in the corpse pose with my eyes closed in order to let my body take care of me physically. And I realized that I had gotten many more creative insights in how I was going to then improve myself. And I figured that these creative insights in the corpse pose might be because of the more relaxed environment, like the environment during creative shower thoughts. And ever since, I noticed that when I didn't know yet what to do next, and then simply rested and relaxed completely by lying down in the corpse pose and thinking about all the options I had and how I was going to execute them, that I was then able to consistently come up with many more creative ideas, often without knowing where exactly these creative ideas and solutions to my problems came from, which would be another way to further maximize my growth and potential. And I then also thought about this corpse pose as something similar to praying, in the sense that I was calling to the divine creative energy to help me to find a creative solution to my problems. And that because I was actually able to come up with these solutions, I also figured that this might be the closest thing to an actually useful prayer. Simply lying down in the corpse pose as relaxed as possible and thinking about what to do next and how to do it, with the idea to channel all of the godly creative energy inside us in order to come up with the best creative solution on how to deal with the situation and how to create something better. All by focusing completely on our body as God's temple and then calling to the divine creative energy inside of it. Part 8 out of 8. All religions having different interpretations of the same divine creative energy that simply wants us to maximize our combined potential. And primarily because of these and many more insights in all kinds of religions and spiritualities, I think I have been able to reconcile most of the other religions and theories on God, life, and our purpose. For example, regarding Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas' theory that everything, including a stone, has a goal or telos, I could respond by saying that yes, inside everything lies the desire to maximize its creative potential, because some other inanimate objects eventually succeeded in being able to form life. And regarding Spinoza's, Newton's and Einstein's belief that God was the geometric order of the world, which manifests itself in the perfection of nature, I would then respond by saying that this is true, and that God in the form of nature is there for us to admire, learn from and improve upon. Furthermore, regarding karma, I reasoned that when we focus on maximizing our potential and help others to do the same, that we can then create happiness, positive karma and heaven on earth. But when we do the opposite, by working against each other, we create unhappiness, negative karma and hell on earth, and a sadness and or anger symptom that indicates that we need to change the current situation and create a heaven on earth again. And finally, regarding predestination and the day of judgment, I would then argue that we are indeed predestined, but that we are predestined and created to do one thing: to help God, the divine creative energy of the universe, to further maximize all of its creative potential, and that we can be judged by God on our everyday actions, by the messages our body gives us in response, and how all of the other creations of God respond to our actions. And that when we have died, we can also be judged, when God, in the form of all the other life forms, can still feel the love we had shown them during our life, and who can then still feel the positive impact of our life in helping them to further maximize God's creative potential. And that our life will have been judged as meaningful and good when other life can still feel our divine creative energy inside of them, and can therefore help them, God, and all of its children in God's goal to maximize all of our combined creative potential. Chapter 4. The goal mindset to maximize our combined creative potential every day. Part 1 out of 7. Seeing the common goal of all humans, animals and life to maximize our combined potential and feeling connected to all things. And with this mindset of God being the creative energy that is inside each and all of us, including animals and even inanimate objects, and then honoring it by always aiming to maximize our combined creative potential, all kinds of amazing positive shifts happened to me. As I could now see each living thing in nature, including us human beings, and feel happy and at peace being with them, knowing that we both shared the same creative energy inside us that wants us to maximize our combined potential. And with fruit trees in particular, I reasoned that this was especially the case because of the fact that these trees produce fruit for other animals to eat, and for the animals to then help the trees to spread their seeds and to procreate. And I learned that this relationship, where two species help each other in different ways, was called a symbiotic relationship. And then I also realized that I myself could not only eat fruit, but also thrive on it, and at the same time also help the fruit tree to spread its seeds and to procreate. And therefore, I found that this was just an absolutely beautiful symbiotic relationship that was created by God, through which all of us could continue to maximize our combined potential. Chapter 2 out of 7. Predator-prey relationship also being symbiotic through challenging each other and population control to further maximize their combined potential. Now, I did struggle a bit to think about why we have life that is designed to compete with, kill and eat other life, such as lions that hunt and eat zebra. Because to me, this didn't seem like cooperation towards further maximization of potential at first. But I then thought about how lions and zebra could stand together and drink from the same water pool when the lion wasn't hungry. And that only when the lion got hungry, it would then challenge all of the zebra to see if they could outrun him, in a sort of contest for who could adapt and improve the most and maximize its running potential the best, with the lion then also acting as a natural population controller, should the zebra population become so big that there wouldn't be enough food for them, which could also explain why they didn't kill the zebra when they weren't hungry. And I then reasoned that this could also still be at least very close to a symbiotic relationship between them, and another beautiful piece of nature designed to further maximize our combined potential as the circle of life. Part 3 out of 7. In order to maximize our potential as humanity, we need to push each other, respect each other, and especially forgive each other. And then I also started to look at competition with other human beings again, which was a place where I had always first and foremost seen others as potential threats and obstacles. But now I realized that regarding competition, such as tennis matches, I could maximize my own potential and our combined tennis potential much better when we instead focused on motivating each other as rivals to become better and stronger, and on helping one another in order to show and create the most beautiful skills and for others to get inspired by. And regarding people who had wronged me or other human beings, I was now also able to sympathize with them and forgive them much more easily, likely because I could now look beyond their current state and instead look at the unlimited potential that was still inside of them, and then wondering what good they might be able to do with their unique and God-given abilities and talents. And when I then reminded myself of my own ability to make up for my mistakes, all of this further motivated me to always give other people a chance for redemption, no matter what they had done, and a chance to once again fulfill their purpose to become a powerful creator that is able to help God and all of its godly children, including me as their brother, to maximize all of our combined potential. Part 4 out of 7. Me now marveling at nature's beauty and the human body's workings and capabilities as a godly design by a godly creator. And when I had realized this divine creative energy inside each and everything around us, I could then also much more easily marvel at all the wondrous creative designs in nature that God has created, like the natural phenomena of the northern lights and rainbows, and the natural landscapes of mountains, waterfalls, and pretty much all of Iceland, along with the amazing and sometimes mind-boggling animal designs, like the platypus, the proboscis/long-nosed monkey, and the diving bell/scuba spider, which is a spider that is able to live underwater by creating an oxygen bubble to breathe through, just like we can use an oxygen tank to scuba dive. And while thinking about this creative energy inside everything, I could also marvel much more easily at everything that God had created for my own personal body as well, like the ability to see, smell, touch, run, think, love, and create. And instead of having taken these things for granted for so long, I could now also feel much more grateful for all these gifts that God had given me, and to use them to help God and all of my godly brothers and sisters to further maximize all of our combined creative potential. Part 5 out of 7. Me then also marveling at our own creations, especially those inspired by God's design through biomimicry. And this also brings me to the way we can honor God, by copying and building upon God's design in nature, which is something called biomimicry. And I think a great example of this was when engineers of the Shinkansen bullet train were faced with the problem of the train making a sonic boom after exiting a tunnel. And one idea for how to help solve this was by looking at birds that made the smallest splash when diving in the water to look for prey, which was the kingfisher. And so the engineers designed a new version of the train, with the nose based on the design of the kingfisher's beak, which then greatly helped to solve the problem, along with basing other elements of the train on other animals of God's designs as well, such as the wings of an owl and the belly of a penguin. And so in this way, we can not only marvel at God's beautiful designs in the form of nature, but we can then also take those godly designs and improve upon them, and in order to then further maximize God's creative potential by using its own creative energy inside of us, and to then also marvel at all of the things we ourselves are then able to create, and at all the things we are able to do. Part 6 out of 7. Honoring our great Creator by always aiming to improve and help others to maximize our potential, in order for us to become great creators as well. And I currently think that when we have realized all of this, we can then serve and honor the divine creative energy that gave life to us in every single moment by first of all listening to all of our godly body's messages and instincts. And second of all, and most importantly, by consciously always simply doing our best to first further maximize our own potential, for example by seeking out new perspectives, trying out new things to get better, and then working to understand what did and did not work to get better, in order to then eventually be able to turn any seemingly terrible situation into an opportunity to learn and grow, and to then help others to do the same. For example, by sharing our current experiences and interpretations and offering to teach them everything we know, and to then continue to focus on this ancient, wondrous and godly process towards the maximization of our combined potential, just like God wants all of its children to do. And I'm as sure as can be that when we are then able to see the godly creative potential in everything and everyone around us, we can then also finally live together in peace and harmony with all of our godly brothers and sisters, and that we can then finally create heaven on earth and anywhere else.
Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful